As I said, my name is Amy Janess. I'm programming coordinator for the Nantucket Atheneum, the island's public library. And I want to welcome you in tonight. Thank you for coming. Tonight's speaker is Tim Borchers. He comes to us from his office in Medway at Borchers Trust Law. And that's really all I'm going to say by way of introduction, because he's going to tell you all about himself as well. So the program's going to last between an hour and 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A button. And as we go along, if you think of a question, feel free to put a question in the Q&A, or at the end, when we open it up, put a question in there, and we'll pull them all up and go through them, and Tim will answer them. So that's pretty much it for me. So without any further ado, Tim, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and make sure I get the right one. Okay. And find my cheat sheet here. Well, thanks for having me, folks at the Atheneum, and thanks for that introduction. I don't know if, does my image appear, Amy? Because I did brush my teeth. Make sure there's no spinach in there.
Yes, you are a little box.
Okay, good. All right. Well, even if the spinach is there, you hardly notice it. I am going to present tonight on saving your Nantucket home, should you choose to do so. I'm going to give a short history of the Nantucket vacation homes in the Northeast in America generally. What are problems inherent in the heirloom or family vacation home succession? What works, what doesn't, how the vacation home fits with the rest of an estate and financial plan to help you factor all that in. Thank you very much, Amy, and to the Atheneum. You can read more about anything having to do with me at our website, borcherslaw.com. But I'm particularly happy that we were able to form something that's called the Second Home Savvy. That's a website that you could Google that has some resources there. A tool called the Heirloom Ownership Trust. I'm admitted in Mass and New Hampshire, got a 6-lawyer law firm, and a few certifications that I didn't just get from Kellogg's box top. Let's start with historic times to present. Boy, I found a lot of beautiful images to capture. So I hope these come through nicely to you. But you know, there's an old street scene from Nantucket, and something more current. Beautiful images. So let's start with history that Nantucketers obviously know, and that's the whaling, where obviously nobody was going there to vacation at that time. It was a growth industry in the 1800s. This was, of course, the time of Moby Dick. The characters of Moby Dick were from Nantucket. Nantucket led the world in whaling. In hindsight, we might say for better or for worse. But of course, the thing that drove it really was whale oil. And this was in high demand because it burned cleanly. I'm sure it wasn't cheap, but people were frugal in the use of it, and it powered an awful lot of lamps. But the industry started to collapse in terms of its demand, which was better for the whales. By the time that petroleum was discovered, I mean, petroleum had been discovered a long time ago, but it really wasn't seen as being very useful. And one of the byproducts that they hated was gasoline. It turned out to be very useful later on, as we know. But the demand for whale oil, because petroleum was being produced out of Pennsylvania and in Russia, which I didn't realize until I did my research, but the worldwide demand for the whale oil did decline considerably as people like John D. Rockefeller built up the refining of oil, Standard Oil Company, et cetera. So as this declined as an industry on the island, what was next for Nantucket? Well, this was a period where there really weren't a lot of single family homes. The vacationing that people did was largely at the end of railroad lines, or in this case, at the end of ferry lines, to large hotels. Think of a lot of the grand old hotels in New England that we're all familiar with, and throughout New England. And the Nantucket Hotel and Resort takes its history from back then, apparently originally called Point Breeze. But that's the way people vacationed, is, they spent the Catskills or at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, and out there on Nantucket. If they went for an extended vacation, they dressed up for dinner and the whole bit, right? So this really took us through the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. Then came the Great Depression, when naturally a lot of that luxury went by the wayside. And as far as the island is concerned, there really wasn't a lot of activity or growth. I mean, there was activity from residents, but there really wasn't any growth until 50s, 60s, 70s. In the late 1800s, it did occur to people that it was probably a good idea to start buying up real estate on the seashore, because it was valuable. As this particular developer said back in 1870 or so, Cyrus Bartol, he was a Protestant minister, but he was also a shrewd real estate developer. When asked, why he didn't put his money into a bank, he said, God Almighty has stopped making Seacoast, as quoted in The Big House, which I recommend. If you haven't read The Big House, it's an easy breezy read. It's not a short book, but a lot of it has to do with the history of that one family that built on Wings Neck in Pocasset. But during this time, the private American vacation home became hot property, at least to the families involved. They were cherished by the family, wonderful places to spend summers at. They were probably never winterized properties. They were on the coastline. They were on the islands. They were on the lakes. Not really that much, though, I would say, on some of the lakes in New England and New York. It really took a long time before they realized, developers realized, hey, we should buy up some of this land and start subdividing it and put on single family homes. Other competition in the vacation home arena came from a rather esoteric, but nonetheless very popular development known as camp meeting grounds. These were, as far as I know, always religious based. The two featured on this page, Ocean Park up in Old Orchard Beach area in Maine, and of course on Martha's Vineyard, the Oak Bluffs area, the Martha's Vineyard Camp Meeting Association. These were formed by, I think, Methodists and Baptists. And they developed as tenting grounds and then into small single family homes. And I've been to the Ocean Park version. And today it's less associated with the religious element, but more just feels like a vacation community. Ocean Park has a big pavilion where they hold concerts in the summer, and quite a fascinating and lovely place. Then a lot of rustic homes were being built, I think camps like this one here that belonged to my mother's family. That's myself and my 4 siblings visiting after my father died in 2009. And just a very rustic 4-room cabin with a flush toilet, but a well outside. Of course, these were very popular, very, very, very low value properties. Um, it was hundreds of dollars a year in taxes, and $1,000 to throw up a shelter, and that's what people called camp. And uh, I know growing up in the 60s and 70s, that it was a fun place to run off to. Today, my kids would turn up their noses and say, "What? There's no Wi-Fi, and we don't each get a bathroom? What's up with that?" And then, of course, there was the more la-di-da side of it, where, of course, Newport. I think that's the marble house there that I've pictured. A somewhat famous family in the middle there, that with their compound. And then, as I say, there's Wings Neck, where the Big House book was written about. But that's just one example of the coastal areas. I'm familiar with Woods Hole and with Chappaquiddick and so many other spots that are developed by single family homes, mostly without associations. And of course, back then, nobody had heard of condominium associations. So we won't even go there with the more current developments that provide for condominium and timeshare style of vacation properties. Then I think that we really need to skip to the post-war period, because this is where things started to heat up. In a lot of the vacation areas where single family homes were being built for vacationing purposes, and what we see happening is more and more communities being built. So on this page here, I've got an example from out in Lake Tahoe, California, but also in New Hampshire, Swissvale, where my family has had a home for a long time. These were affordable vacation communities. They had shared amenities, beaches. Swissvale had a ski slope and a swimming pool until liability risks shut them both down. We had a rope tow, we had an indoor pool, but those have long been closed. The ski hill became what my family knew as Tick Hill. We renamed it as Tick Hill because we all walked up from the bottom to the top, and by the time we got up there, I think we each had about 40 wood ticks all over our legs and in our shoes. And my kids will never forget that day, and hence it's not Birch Hill to us, it's Tick Hill. The boom on Nantucket really materialized in the 1970s. The land grabs of the 50s and 60s over the small 47 square miles led to subdivision, the building of modest private homes. These were not expensive. And that gradually gave way, especially by the 90s and 2000s, to some of those being taken down or at least substantially rehabbed. And a lot of the older homes in the town center being rehabbed and being redone as luxury homes. And any land that could be developed, often giving way to the building of very, very fine homes. If you look at these statistics, which I found the source being neighborhoodscout.com, you see that the age of homes on Nantucket, yeah, there's a lot that were built in the last 20 years, but the biggest chunk, over half, between 1970 and 1999, where the building boom just exploded. Now, if anybody that's familiar with the island for a long time knows that. I have some relatives with property there, and I think that about aligns with when they settled as a second home in the 60s and 70s. But you see that the older you get on these properties between 1940 and 1970, and then 1939 and older, they only account for 25% of the housing stock. And the older homes, I'm sure, as you would attest, there on the island have largely been rehabbed, or people have their eye on them to do so. And I've looked at a lot of pictures, and they're just beautifully redone. It's marvelous. But look what it's done to values. So this is not a median price. This is median value. The average sale price of properties is much higher than this. I think it's over 2 million for properties that are currently being sold or are on the market. But median home value is already at 1.1 million. And if you look at the statistic on this page, you can see that above 1.2 million, you get over half the value of the properties at 51%. And then between 900 and 1.2, another 20%. So 3/4 or so are far and away above the value of the vacation properties almost anywhere else for comparable size and access to water and so forth. So Nantucket is really in a category by itself. This little dot over here to the right, at the bottom right of the page, you don't see the whole screen, but what that represents is that Nantucket is in the very top percentile of value of real estate in the country amongst a very elite group of property values and vicinities that will support those values. Prices have risen exponentially each decade. This slide actually shows values, not prices. So since 2000, values have increased 110%, and prices had increased about 120%. I don't have that slide here. But again, for those of you who are on the island, this is no surprise to you. I was supposed to be on the island this summer to do this presentation and had planned where we were going to stay, and I was looking forward to it. So hopefully another time, right? Well, it's not always up. This trend in 2018 was an article in Forbes and certainly was up in the upward direction. As you can see from this article, Nantucket, as quote unquote wealthy Americans buy beach houses, we smash records. But then a year later, look what Atlantic East is writing here in May of 2019. The real estate market stats are in through the end of April, and something is going on, something that is not positive for sellers of property in Nantucket. The number of sales is down 27% for the first 4 months compared to the same period last year. The dollars that those sales represent are down 37%. So clearly it's a market that is vulnerable to swings. And I am told that with people hunkering down and being able to work remotely, that there's more demand than ever, and prices may be higher than ever in Nantucket as we speak as a result. Now let's switch to from the present to the future, and let's see what we can talk about in this category. So this topic often is described as saving the vacation home. There are books written called Saving the Vacation Home. There's one that's now about 20 or 25 years out of print by an attorney by the name of Holliday, who was based out of the Lakes region in Michigan, up the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. and built a practice around planning for vacation home succession. But what we have detected in this generational transition is that vacation properties are valued, and there's no question about it, by the families. They're cherished. The grandkids are saying to grandparents, hey, when I get to live here, when I have my family here, this is what I'm going to do, and I can't wait to to see what we're doing many years from now. And grandma, grandpa, that is true, right? We are going to get this house, right? But the fact is that left unprotected, these valuable properties are lost every day. They're lost for lots of reasons that I'll go through in my example that's coming up here. So this is really about saving, if that's what you want to do, saving your legacy. If it's part of your legacy, then it makes sense to think ahead to how do you preserve this if this is important to your identity. So the success stories are families that do have a one-of-a-kind vision for their family treasure, and that actually begin planning. They plan, and I've seen some emails in advance of this session here tonight. People are already planning. They've already got a trust. They might have an understanding among family members that we're going to keep the property. They might even have a financial plan. Fantastic. That's great. Where that might be polished up is going to be in some of the specifics. But this plan has got to incorporate input from family and from advisors. You want to know that there's buy-in, and you really should get some good advice on how to take care of this transition. The failures, on the other hand, occur because there's no actual instructions from mom and dad or grandmother and grandfather. There's no instructions for how to hand it down, and there's no financial support. So without financial support, my prediction is that most inheritances of homes that are other than the camp on the lake, like the one I showed you 10 minutes ago that my family had, that hardly cost anything to run. Without financial support, financial savings, without a dictum from on high that you children, you must set aside money for this from the top of our inheritance, then people are going to be having to nickel and dime each other. There are going to be crises that come up. So instructions and financial support are the key causes of the failure. As we say, if there's no plan, then you plan to fail. And what has to be pointed out is legally, the story is that if you don't plan to agree to retain the property for a period of time, then anybody can break up the party at any time, and that's known as a partition. So any of the new co-owners that have inherited the property, the brothers and sisters, eventually the cousins, can ask the probate court to break up the property. And it's called a petition to partition, or have a court-ordered sale of the property. So that's not a pretty event. I've participated in a lot of those, and it's really basically a lawsuit by one family member against others. Usually after there's been an attempt at negotiation, please buy me out, but please buy me out at top dollar. Don't take into account the fact that if I don't partition, I'm going to wait many years to get paid. I want top dollar today for my share of this property. And again, if it was $100,000 little hovel on some lake in the very northern tip of Maine, maybe that wouldn't be such a hardship. But if we're trying to divide your $1.5 to $2.5 million property on Nantucket, and somebody partitions and says they want full value through the court-ordered sale, the court is going to require that. They're going to say, yeah, you want to buy your sibling out, you got to pay full price. So let's take a look at predictable difficulties with the process of inheriting the property and running it together. So I'll just give you the top candidates here for difficulties on the next two slides. The first one is charging family members for expenses and even the usage of the property. People take very different attitudes about this. Some people say, well, of course we would pay for the expense of keeping it up. And others think, well, I'm an owner. I don't really want to have to pay. And I don't care if the property is run down. I don't certainly want to improve it, let alone, even bother to keep it in good condition. And look at the property value. It doesn't matter if I keep it in good condition or not, because it's still going to retain its value. I mean, look what's happening. That argument can go. Well, I guess if everybody had the same attitude, that might be one thing. But usually there's somebody in the family that says, well, no, that's not my idea. In fact, that's stupid and you're a jerk. And I don't want to talk to you now for 6 months or even longer, because we can't agree on whether to paint the house or to repair the bathroom or repoint the chimney or put on a new roof. Deciding what improvements should be undertaken and at what cost. So some may say, well, mom and dad kept this in a very humble condition. I think we should do the same thing. We'll buy the lowest cost fixtures and we'll do the work ourselves. And others are thinking, no, that's not what you do with a $2 million property. You put some craftsmanship into this and you take care of it, and that will pay dividends later. Renting it is not always popular with various family members. If the family can afford to keep it for themselves, and some families are big enough that they use it for the whole season themselves, then renting it may not be necessary. But in other cases, heck, that's the best way to provide some revenue to justify the expense of keeping it longer term. Buying out siblings who want money and may petition a court to sell the property. This is a big deal. Clearly, in families where there are one or two or more that just want the cash and say, see you later, maybe that can be arranged. But that's a predictable difficulty that without a written agreement ahead of time, where parents lay down the law about how this is to be handled, siblings can demand to be bought out, and there better be liquidity for that, or else the property is going to have to be sold. Dealing with individual owners' issues. So what I mean here is that siblings that, sister might be going through a divorce, brother might be having to file bankruptcy. The next sibling may be suffering from Alzheimer's at age 70 and in need of expensive care fairly shortly thereafter. And they need to raise the money to do it. Or maybe they've run out of their own money and they have to disclose, as I've had clients had to do, that they are a part owner in a second home. And Medicaid will deny coverage because they will insist that you sell that property. And how do you sell that property? You petition to partition. So we've seen this happen. Number 6 was limiting or not, whom can each owner give their interest to? So can you give it to spouses, partners, children, stepchildren, a second spouse? Most people, not always, but most planners think that, well, why don't we leave it to the nuclear family? Why don't we leave it to children? Probably not to stepchildren, probably not to spouses. But I think that we have to be very open to those combinations and allow the next generation of beneficiaries to be able to redefine these terms. I don't know about you, but I wonder sometimes, will people even be marrying, in another 50 years? Is that really going to be the relationship? Anyway, just a passing thought. But adopting a co-ownership agreement that all can agree upon, that's a difficult thing. If you say to your kids, oh, you'll figure it out, and when the time comes, I want you to come up with an agreement. In my experience, 9 out of 10 of those attempts are going to fail. I have one family right now that has agreed in principle how they want to handle things, and it's going along very well. They've agreed on a lot of important points, and they're allowing me to draft up an agreement that's going to contain those points. They've decided they want to keep it in the family for another 60 years, which to them is 2 generations. They're all in their 50s and 60s. 5 of those kids, and then they amongst them have 5 children of their own, so that would make it 5 grandchildren. And then those young adults are all thinking about their families. And I kind of discouraged them on the 60-year time frame. I thought that might be a little too long, again, in my experience. But we can provide some exits. We need an exit plan on these agreements so that it doesn't necessarily have to go as long as all that. Sell the property. This makes a lot of sense for a lot of families, is just to say, look, we've had a good run here. This has been terrific. It's been lovely, but we don't need to insist that the property be kept in the family. It's okay to sell. It's all right. One of my favorite techniques is to keep it for a few years after the current generation has died, maybe 5 or 10 years. Provide funding for that period of time. It's kind of the last hurrah, perhaps. And at the end of that period of time, the property shall be sold. As I say on the slide here, that children should be specifically authorized to be the buyers, usually with a discount from full value. So what that means is that you're allowing a child to be a buyer, and because you value the property staying in the family, and because it's expected that the child will still welcome their siblings and nieces and nephews to visit, that in order to preserve that value, they should be able to buy it at a discount. How big a discount? That's anywhere from, believe it or not, a 90% discount. That is to say, you only pay 10% of the value, all the way up to the reverse. People pay 90% of the value. But I rarely think it's appropriate for buyouts to be anything more than paying 90% of the value, because usually those who are buying it are taking the property as is, and there's no realtor involved. So there's already a savings, and it seems like gouging for the family to expect the ones buying to pay full price. There's a lot been written on this. There's a lot of law around discounting when there's a built-in difficulty or lack of marketability of partial shares. I just had a conversation with somebody this afternoon, and they own 2 homes in Dennis as a family. They're right next to each other. It's a big family, 7 siblings, and they still use the 2 homes that they inherited from their parents. And I said to them, you have something that's really not valuable individually. I mean, if I was going to buy out your 1/7 interest, I said to them today, I'll buy your 1/7. I'll pay you 5 cents on the dollar, because essentially I'm counting on this being tied up for at least the next 30 or more years, judging by their family situation. I said, I'll give you 5 cents on the dollar, because by the time it gets sold in 30 or 40 years, that investment would have been a payoff. That there'd be some payoff for that. So selling is nothing to be, I'll say, ashamed of. I mean, if it's difficult to come to these agreements, and it's often preferable to say in your plan, the property shall be sold. Because if you don't say that, then if there's more than one child involved, you can bet that at least one is going to say, well, I think we should keep it. Mom and Dad wanted us to keep it. We've always had this. Where else are we going to go? Well, where are we going to get together? And our children love being together. And all the arguments, which are absolutely spot on, good arguments. They're true, but the better wisdom is not to let them face that problem where one says, I want it, and the other one says, we no longer should keep it. We no longer need it. I have other plans. Let's have 1 or 2 more summers, and then let's sell it. And in fact, we have to sell it because that's what Mom and Dad wrote in their trust. I'm saying Mom and Dad, or whoever the owners are. It could be brothers and sisters. It could be partners. It can be spouses, but you get the idea. All right, so we need to do some planning. Everybody knows that. We need to do some planning. I mean, it's like the rest of your estate. You write a will, you write a trust, you think ahead to how it should be passed down. In this plan, what will your family miss without this property? And what is the cost of the planning? What is the cost of making this plan, putting this plan together? Let's use a specific example to work through the issues in planning. So let's take the case of Martha. So Martha has a lovely $2.2 million beach access home in Nantucket, on Nantucket. I guess you can say in Nantucket because that's the town as well. But all right, she's 71. She was widowed but has remarried. She's in good health, but there's been some Alzheimer's in the family. She has 4 children. Her husband, I didn't say her husband's name was Dan. Yeah, Dan. Dan has 3. So she's remarried, and her new husband has 3 kids of his own. All right, so this is our fact pattern. 2 of her 4 children regularly visit the property and are definitely interested in keeping it. They've made their point of view very clear. The 3rd child loves the home, but is not sure that she can afford to participate and be part of this. And the 4th child actually is disabled and would not use the home after Martha is gone. For one reason or another, can't get out there, her disability will get worse or whatever the cause is. Martha says, in a phrase that I've heard many times, I hopefully will leave them enough money for them to keep the house if they want to. They'll figure it out. And I have to say, Martha, stop right there. They're not going to figure it out. Oh, yes, my kids are great. They love each other. They're smart. Look at this one has this degree, and this one over here is handy, and this one over here. I'm one of 5. I wouldn't want to be sharing a home with my siblings right now, even though we meet most of those qualifications that I just rattled off. Somebody's smart, they've got advanced degrees, they get along, we love each other. Some of us are handy, some of us aren't. I wouldn't want to own a home with them because we have very different points of view, perhaps, of how it could be used. We're not going to figure it out. If you want us to keep this house, Martha, you have to give us some really strong guidance of how to run this into the next generation. So what are the issues for Martha and her children in accomplishing what we're talking about? So first of all, as you could tell from the fact pattern, Martha may have some ill health in her future. We saw that there's some Alzheimer's in her family. She's 71. So let's say anything can happen. Having a new husband or the second spouse here can complicate the estate. So what are his expectations? I might say to Martha, really, I don't really care what his expectations are. What you want is what counts. But, being a responsive spouse to the needs of her and wants of her husband in terms of sharing in the property, perhaps. Okay, well, we'll at least consider that. But by and large, this is not his deal. This is your deal, your family, your 4 kids. It really doesn't have much to do with his. Now, if they've been married a long time, that can change things. Sometimes this new spouse ends up being a financial contributor to the property, has a lot, if you will, at stake in the property. Most of the time, I think those rights are derivative of the children. If Martha dies, Dan can still be a factor in the property as long as he still has a good relationship with his stepchildren. A lot of times that's going to be the way it works out. And other times we want to give the surviving husband or spouse some actual rights, the right to a week or 2 of use of the property, maybe more, maybe longer. Maybe they have a summer or 2 to themselves. But then it's in the documents that they have to leave, or they have to sell, or they have to share in a way that wasn't there before. And then you have to anticipate, what are these personalities like? Is that something that the surviving spouse is really going to cooperate with and respond to? And we really have to kind of get in the heads of people and take seriously my responsibility, for example, as a drafter, to interview and to provide some guidance as to how I think this is all going to come out. The next issue identified there is the protection of the disabled child's share. So that child doesn't expect to participate, doesn't expect to be at the property following mom's death. So how do we protect her inheritance? And if she does have a disability, how do we prevent that inheritance from having to be sold and having to be spent on her care if she might otherwise qualify for benefits, for example? Estate taxes. So we've got a $2.2 million property. Estate taxes in Massachusetts on a $2.2 million estate, let alone other assets that she has, just on the $2.2 million alone would be approximately 113, 14,000, somewhere in that area. That would be due 9 months after she's passed. So there better be some liquidity to pay that, or we got a problem. And if you're not a resident of Massachusetts, but you own property on Nantucket and you die a resident of another state, Massachusetts is still going to want to tax it. They will still impose an estate tax. There are ways to limit that. There are even ways to totally eliminate that. But that is a factor. Martha, don't forget, has that they'll figure it out attitude. That's also an obstacle. We have to get over that in the planning process and say, did your kids figure out at age 20 how to share the car for their date night? Did they share their toys and games when they were younger? Does anyone carry a chip on their shoulder? Oftentimes people don't answer those questions, but I can see from the body language that, that there may be some issues looming. Affordability for the heirs, and then just anticipating that there will be some disputes. Now, disputes are natural. People who own things together are going to have disputes, but let's plan ahead for these issues. So what are some of the considerations in planning for buyouts or equalizing the estate? So equalizing is the term that we use to describe maybe 2 out of the 4 children receive the property and the other 2 receive something in lieu of an interest in the property. So here's Martha's situation. Martha has, as you know, the 4 kids, and she has a $4 million estate in total. After Massachusetts estate tax, the estate will be about $3.6 million. Divide that by 4 heirs, you get $900,000 apiece. Out of that, the home alone is $2.2 million, and each person's share, each child's share of the home would therefore be $550,000 each. Okay, so 900 total is the quarter share, and then the quarter share of the home is 550. So as you can see, the other assets of the estate are worth about $350,000 each. That'll give us the grand total of 900 per child. Remember, 2 of the children want to be there, and they may want to buy the other 2 out at full price. So let's say that if we had the values that exist today, they would have the resources to work with. Okay, they've got $350,000 of cash, right, that they just inherited, but they owe the other siblings $550,000. So in order for the 2 to buy the other 2 out, they're going to be short 200 grand a piece. They've got to come up with that to buy out the other 2. And I'm not even going to go back and see if I did that math correct. Something about that's irking me right now. But you get the idea. They're short on the buyout. So how can they afford this? Well, maybe the 200,000 is affordable because they have it from somewhere else. They've got their own resources. They could mortgage their home and come up with $200,000 in order to buy out this property. Those are possibilities. So other things to consider is Martha could possibly reduce the price. So definitely say that there's going to be a discount. None of this full value purchase. If somebody wants money today, they should be willing to take less than waiting for it for years to come. That's known as a discounted present value. Or she could preset the price. She could say, prices are just skyrocketing. I'm locking the price in at where it is today, $2.2 million. She could live another 20 years. The 2.2 might seem pretty low, but she laid down the law. It's her law to write. And if she says that that's the price that is going to be used, then that's the deal. Now, Martha might buy some extra life insurance. Maybe that's a solution. Maybe even the 2 children who want to be able to buy the other siblings out could pay the premiums on the life insurance. Maybe a $500,000 policy on Martha at age 71 may cost $15,000 a year. But it would be worth it for those 2 children to pay $7,500 a year as kind of a forced savings plan to be prepared to do that buyout someday. As we said, buyers may have to get a mortgage. They may be able to combine that with some reduction in the price, etc. One of the formulations that I like, as I mentioned, is 10 years and we're done. That seems to have a lot of traction for people. You can rationalize that on the basis that that's actually a fairly long period of time. And you have to think back 10 years ago, what were you doing back then? How old were your children? What was your career? Where were you living? Who was the president? I mean, 10 years, it will take you back. And you realize that if your kids got 10 years out of this after you passed, that's still not a bad deal in many, many cases. So there will be a payday for those who don't want to participate as much. And if you can afford to provide a kitty to go along with that, so 10 years of funding to pay taxes and insurance, to pay for reasonable upkeep of the property, that may very well be an affordable package that that current owners can sell to their family or can be sold on the concept of. Failing that, those 10 years, if you don't plan ahead for them, could be miserable because that's going to be enough time for people to have their disagreements fester. Somebody goes through a divorce, somebody goes through financial hard times, and the proverbial stuff will hit the fan, and we may have a real situation on our hands for how to keep this property. At the end of the 10 years without an agreement in advance that says 10 years is it, at the end of 10 years, somebody's going to want to keep going. And they're going to say, nope, not selling. Nope, not doing it. And then you're going to be in that petition to partition misery to try to live with each other or to try to force the property to be sold. Another solution might be take it or leave it, i.e. stay in the house with the others or walk away. You know, if you want to be part of this, fine. But if not, you can walk away, but you're going to leave all of the money on the table. You're going to leave it all on the table. Walk away. You don't have to pay. You don't have any obligation. So with a really valuable property, that's going to be hard for somebody to do, I admit. I have had people do that as recently as in the past couple of weeks. We had an heir who said, I don't see my siblings wanting to sell for many years to come. We're all in our 60s. I just don't want to be having to be bothered with this anymore. She moved from Massachusetts to California. She gave up her share of the house, and that's the end of it. And she's happy as a clam that she did so. Other possible ways to plan can include, and I'm just going to pause here for a second. I'm going to take a drink, and I'm also going to make sure that I'm not missing any communications from Amy here. Let me pull up the proper screen. Okay, and here we are. So let's look at some possible funding. One of my favorites is taking the proceeds from the sale of the primary home. So if this is only a second home on the island, which it is for most of you, one ideal spot to get money at the time of death, we don't even think of it as money today, is our primary residence. Sell that home and use those funds as the kitty or the start of the kitty or part of the proceeds, if it's a very valuable primary home, to form the kitty to support the property on Nantucket. A Roth IRA, for example, is a really good resource because it's non-taxable income when it comes out of the Roth. Earmark the Roth IRA to be the fund to help pay for the property, the upkeep of the property. Some percentage of the estate, a dollar amount off the top, and a trust fund today that you start and you add money to it every year. It's kind of your own forced savings. It's that jar on the kitchen table that you're adding to every year for money to be set aside to take care of this property after you're gone. All of those are techniques that we've used that people like. Martha also has to consider some taxes. We talked about the estate taxes. The federal estate tax currently doesn't kick in on estates until individuals have more than $11.5 million or couples $2.3 million. But that's likely to go back down. In 2026, under the current law, it would cut in half. So we'd be down to $6 million after inflation. My estimate is $6 million each, 12 million as a couple. But it's possible it could go even lower than that. We'll see what happens with the next office holders in the White House and Congress in that regard. Capital gains taxes, if you were to sell while you're alive, bear in mind, are going to be anywhere from 15 to 25%, or they can be higher. Most people are going to be in the category of 15% federal, and then whatever your state capital gains tax would be. Like a Massachusetts resident would typically be paying 20% total, 5.1 to the state and 15 to the federal government. But if you've been renting the property out, you also have recapture of depreciation. So the tax will go higher depending on your situation. If you hold on to it until death, you get what's called a step up in tax basis at death, if you can keep the property that long and keep it till death. So what that means is that, let's say the property today, if you sold it, you'd have $1 million of capital gain, $1 million of profit. If you lost 20% of that to taxes, that's 200,000. But if you could wait until you died and then pass the property on to your heirs, and they inherit it at a time where, again, it's be the same $1 million profit, that $1 million profit will be erased for tax purposes. There'll be no taxable profit. If the property continues to appreciate, and by that point there's a $2 million profit, again, all of that would be erased for tax purposes under the current law. Doesn't mean the law will always be that way, but currently we've had this step up, as that's what it's called, a step up in tax basis. We've had that for a long time now. If it's your primary residence, then you only get an exemption of $250,000 per owner occupant of the property. So a married couple could sell the property, and even two partners or siblings could sell the property, and each get a $250,000 exemption from capital gains taxes. So if you had a $500,000 profit, you'd pay 0 tax if there were 2 of you. If there were 3 owners, $750,000. If there's 1 owner, $250,000. That's the maximum exemption you're going to get on a primary residence sale. You can also do tax deferred exchanges and charitable gifts. So the charitable gift idea, and I see we are at the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to be wrapping it up here. The charitable gift, besides, I know on Nantucket you all go to bed early, so I got to wrap it up. But the charitable gift idea is pretty neat. What you can do is you can keep the right to use the property for life. You keep it for life, you enjoy it. When you die, it all goes to charity. Now, your family doesn't get anything unless you substitute another asset in its place, like a life insurance policy. But you get a write-off today for making a charitable gift in the future, and there's not going to be any estate tax on the property. Nobody's going to fight over it. The charity gets it. That may or may not be a great idea, but you can also leave it to your children for 10 years, and after 10 years of their use, it goes to charity. There's all kinds of combinations with that. But that comes with, like I say, some current tax benefits, if you can itemize the deductions that go along with that, as well as saving estate taxes in your estate. The tax deferred exchange idea is, if you've used this property as an income property, then you're allowed to buy another income property in its place, but you have to spend as much or more as what you sell the property for. So if you sell this property for $3 million, then you're going to have to find 1 or up to 3 replacement properties. You're allowed up to 3 replacement properties to buy in order to defer the capital gain. And that's all it does, is defers the gain until you sell the next property, unless you hold those until death, and then there's a step up in basis. So these are some ideas. It's food for thought. I don't expect any of you to latch onto it and say, aha, that's the solution, but it's giving you some ideas for how to manage the taxes. The next slide is to plan ahead for the mode of inheritance. Should it be a trust? Maybe an LLC is appropriate. Setting aside the funds, as we talked about, preparing for the buyout, creating a long-term agreement or framework, and insisting that the property be sold, if not immediately after 1, 2, 5, or 10 years of use by the family. Martha has the control. She's the owner. She can lay down the law in any of these ways that she wants to. So where does that leave you? You can take the heirloom property test yourselves. The chat box feature, if you're on the Zoom call, I believe we're prepared to give you this link where you can jot it down there at the bottom of the screen. It's a 10-part test. These 2 pages synopsize it. And these have to do with answering these questions. And then let's see what your ranking is as you do this. I would love to see my heirs inherit the home. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, most of my heirs are enthusiastic about the home, and I could definitely see them wanting to keep it going. Number 3, I can see them cooperating, discussing, and helping each other out. Any heir who has less time or interest in the home will be pleased to go along with keeping it. I have funds to set aside off the top of my estate to pay taxes and insurance and basic upkeep for at least some period of time, or I'm willing to begin that fund. Next, I'm willing to set up an agreement in advance for my heirs to inherit in a governed and smooth fashion. I can foresee the heirs willingly following whatever leaders I select to manage the property. If you've got a big enough family, you probably need to choose, at least initially, who should manage the property. Choose people that are diplomatic, that are not going to delay decisions, that are going to be good communicators. I foresee the heirs willingly following that leadership. The property is fairly easy and not too expensive to maintain. That would be a plus. It's okay if the heirs decide it's not for them and decide to sell by majority vote. Majority is important. You know? Okay, if you have to make it unanimous, okay. But if you can say you're willing to let a majority say it's time to sell, then that may make the difference between whether you should do this or not for the next generation. And then finally, if any heir wants to be bought out, they should take a price cut to get bought out. So important to express that in order to keep peace and make it easy on the others. So that's the heirloom test. You can take that test, as I say, at that hyperlink there that you see on the screen. In addition, our website does have further resources. If you went to borcherslaw.com, if you go into the search box, you could find these anyway, but something about vacation home or second home or heirloom property. There you'll find an agreement, how to come to an agreement, some of the factors on a shared home, and a second home planning checklist. So there are some tools that may help people. I am happy to take questions tonight. The most important question about the future of your vacation home is really, how will you be remembered? You know, that it's one thing to say, you know, Grandma, Grandpa, they were so kind, they were funny. Gee, didn't they give us a good time there, good memories. But if the last thing that they remember is that the house was left to them to try to figure out, and it's a mess and there's conflict, that's, I'm going to say, not how you want to be remembered. So be remembered positively is our slogan, and or be remembered positively, another way to think of it. But if you want to get in touch with me, Tim at Borchers Law, there at the website. So I'm going to go back now. I don't know whether I should stop sharing. I guess I should. And let's just go back to see what Amy's been doing.
I've been listening.
All right.
So before we launch into any questions, we have a couple of requests for either more detail or review of things that you said, a clarification. So one of them says, when you say agreement, like the 60-year family, what is the legal type of document?
Okay, great question. So one way that agreement takes form is that you, as the current owner, literally write up the agreement, and it's an agreement with yourself. You're the party of the first part and the party of the second part of the agreement. You're saying, this is the agreement that I'm imposing. It's like a covenant. It's like a restriction. It can be part of your current trust. It could be a side agreement. It can be extra terms of a company like an LLC if you want to go that route. But typically, where I draw it up as the two parties are my client's revocable estate planning trust. So just their revocable estate planning trust is one party, and the other party is themselves personally. So we have the two parties of an agreement, and this is now binding on the trust. The trust is a party, and now the trust is told to keep going for 60 years. So you've got a package that you can pass along, comes with the agreement. It's a restriction that they all have to comply with. Now, will that last the 60 years totally intact? Not necessarily. If you provide in that agreement that by unanimous consent, they can sell the property, or by majority agreement, they might amend the terms. Those would be typical arrangements.
Thank you. And then regarding the step up in basis example, we have a request here that you just repeat what that is.
Sure.
And go over it again.
Yes, and I always have to repeat that. So you're not alone in questioning. So so this is the way the law works on tax basis. It's either carryover basis or it's step up basis. Carryover just means that if you give the property to somebody during your lifetime, your low basis in the property is going to carry over to them that you just gave it to. So you say, I've got two kids, I'm 75, I'm going to give my property to the two kids right now. I'm giving it to them. And now it's their problem. You just made a gift and they carry over your low basis. You know, you bought this home in 1970 and they're going to sell it for $4 million or something someday. They're going to pay a whopping big capital gains tax. Now, on the other hand, there's a step up in basis. So if you said to those same two kids, I want to keep the right to this property for life, you might have a life estate, for example, that would be one term to use. I'm going to keep it for life, and you don't really get it until I die. I'm going to deed it to you through preferably a trust, but I keep the right for it. The right to it for life. Now those heirs will get a step up in the basis at death because I retained the interest until death. And now the step up will be whatever it's worth at death. We appraise the property at death and it's worth X. That becomes the new tax basis, and your heirs sell it for X. They pay zero capital gains tax because their tax basis and the sale price are the same. I hope that helps.
Okay. Do you want to address some of the questions that were emailed earlier, or?
I can do that. One question earlier was, right now my house is in a revocable trust for my children. Would it be wise to change to an irrevocable trust? So a revocable trust, like its name suggests, is a trust agreement that you can tear up, you can take back, you can amend, you can revoke whatever you put under the trust name and put it back in your own name. You can just revoke the trust and say, forget about it, that was a mistake, I don't want it anymore. So A revocable trust is just your alter ego. An irrevocable trust is one that you cannot change for the most part. There are things that you can keep strings on, but for the most part, whatever you put in the trust, you can't take back. So if you are considering an irrevocable trust, you have to have a good reason to do that, right? Because now you're going to give up the ability to take the property back. There's only two reasons to do an irrevocable trust. One is to save taxes, and the other is to protect the property from having to be sold to pay your creditors or your nursing home or whatever your motivation is going to be. So it's either to protect it or to save taxes. Otherwise, if you don't have those motivations, there's no reason to go irrevocable. You can keep it revocable. It's going to become irrevocable when you die because you're no longer around to revoke it. But for now, you may not need to change from revocable to irrevocable. Whatever you do in terms of this potential agreement that you're going to lay down the law with, that can be an agreement that affects either the revocable or the irrevocable trust. Either way, that agreement will pertain to the property. And if you already have the property in an irrevocable trust, it's still possible to impose an agreement. It's possible to impose an agreement despite the fact you've already put it in an irrevocable trust. There is a way to do that. All right, now the second question I got in advance was, what is the right structure to facilitate decision-making when usage is set to be shared? So at the point where we got to start sharing this, what's the right structure? I'm not sure there is a right structure. Let me say first off that most families are used to sharing the property to some extent, right? You already cohabitate when you overlap on weekends, or if mom and dad are there or grandma and grandpa are there, then you're already cohabitating, you're already sharing. Or even if you don't overlap, your weeks are abutting in the use of the property. And it's understood that whoever's leaving shall clean it up and shall refill the, I don't know what needs to be refilled, but put things away and keep it clean, put the trash out. So you're already used to having some rules. You may need to formalize some of those at this time. I don't find that to be the biggest problem. Yeah, people can tick each other off because they have, somebody's neat and somebody isn't neat, but usually you can deal with that. What I really think is the decision-making issue is that you've got to have ways of resolving disputes. There's a couple of quick tips I'll give. One of them is if you do have a manager of the property that you're selecting ahead of time, a treasurer, a manager, a captain, allow that person the freedom to spend and give them an annual budget that they don't have to consult with anybody else on. It might be $2,000 per project. It might be $10,000 max for the year. It could be $2,000 max for the year. Whatever you think is appropriate. Where aside from paying taxes and insurance bills, I mean those have to be paid. But if a tree falls on the property and you got to do a repair and there's an insurance deductible, you just got to do it, and that shouldn't have to go before a committee. The second tip would be that when it comes to significant decisions like adding another bathroom or digging out the crawl space and making it a full basement, you really have to have some rules set out in advance over how many people have to participate in that decision, what kind of majority you have to have. Is it 4 out of 5 children, 3 out of 4, 2 out of 3? Is it a simple majority? Is there a tiebreaker? So if you can anticipate some of that, all the better. Maybe put in a mediation clause so that if things really get bad, that they can resort to a mediator. Another part of that question was, what about spouses who have developed a love of Nantucket and contribute to the maintenance through their own efforts? So here, I think the family has to be sensitive to that notion, especially if there aren't children from that same marriage. So I'm assuming we're talking about a child who's married. If there are grandchildren, then typically the son-in-law, daughter-in-law is going to ride on the coattails of the grandchildren. That their rights are going to be derivative. They get to be there because their own kids are there, and it's all one big happy family. But if you want to actually give them rights, oftentimes it should be just a lifetime use only. The ability to have a week or two, or whatever your schedule is, to themselves. They have to contribute financially in some way, but it's possible to lock those in. But they're not going to have any legal rights. They're not going to be able to pass it on to the next spouse that they marry. Okay, if they remarry, they're not going to be able to pass it to the next stepchildren, and it's not going to be lost to their creditors. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. I have a question here that seems pretty Nantucket centric.
Okay.
So the question is, do you have a view about the downside of preservation easements on homes that will be kept in the family? So here on Nantucket, we have a lot of historic homes, and homeowners have signed agreements to protect it.
Yes. So I had some experience with that in West Falmouth, where that's also a similar temptation to go along with. So far, my experience with that has been largely positive, because the preservationists do want to allow the family to use the property in exchange for getting the extra acreage that might go with it, or to preserve the structure from being torn down. The downside is typically they also expect you to make a donation of some cash. They don't want to have to be at risk of preserving the property as an organization. And they're not equipped for that. So I would be prepared for that part of the equation. And of course, there isn't going to be a payday if that was going to be important to the family. So that I think should be looked at. But yeah, proceed with caution. Get good advice about what it all means to your family in the long term.
Okay, let's see. So here's a Martha question.
Yeah.
We're going back to your example of Martha. And the question is, if Martha has rented out the property and she passes away and the heirs do not rent out the property before eventually selling it, does the need to recapture the depreciation Martha took also disappear with this step up in basis?
It does. The recapture of depreciation under current law also disappears at the death of the current owner. So it's quite a deal, and that's why I'm not always sure that deal is going to stick around for good. There was one year, 2010, where the federal government experimented with, I guess it's fair to call it that, let's let the family only get a $1.3 million step up in basis, and anything above $1.3 million, it's a carryover basis. So you can clearly see that would make a huge difference in many large estates. That was the year that the founder of Walmart died, and Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, died. And it was interesting to see what they chose to do in that year. So I wouldn't count that out. That's it's always possible that benefit could go away.
Okay, I think before I ask the last question, I'm just going to share something that an attendee put in the chat while you were giving your overview of Nantucket real estate.
Okay.
And you were talking about your perception that we're in another hot period.
Yeah.
So this person says, Fisher Real Estate just reported that August real estate activity is off the charts with over 100 sales agreements signed so far this month.
Yeah.
So she's backing you up there.
Yeah. In one of my slides tonight, somebody might have noticed that I actually took a slide that showed how many properties were on the market at the time of that slide, which was the first quarter of the year. There were about 350 properties on the market at that time. So with 100 deals in 1 month right now, I bet there's a lot of people thinking of selling. Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's looking like this is the final question.
Okay.
And it might be a little bit of a recap, but the question is, while in this generation there will only be one heir, but there will be multiple heirs in the subsequent generation, do you have any recommendations on how best to think about this?
I love that question because people do tend to think that I've only got one child and so it's simple. I'll just leave the property to them, if I understood the question correctly. You know, why bother with any of this funny business? But you know, unfortunately, we don't know what the order of death is going to be. So I think it's best to try to set up an agreement in anticipation of there being multiple owners. Sometimes that's just what happens. I do see a question about, I just opened up the chat myself and I just see the last one. Do I come to Nantucket? Heck, I was supposed to be there and maybe next summer it can actually happen. But I can't promise that that'll be the case, but with Zoom, it can be like I'm there tomorrow.
All right, well, do you have any final thoughts for us this evening? You've given us a lot to think about.
Well, good. Yeah, I just want to say I enjoyed doing the research, and I was surprised at just exactly just how unique Nantucket actually was. It's not Martha's Vineyard, it's not Falmouth, and it's quite a place. The people that I know out there, a lot of clients and homeowners that I know, you really have a great thing going. So I hope happy trails to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And maybe we'll get to meet you in person.
All right. Thanks for having me. Be well.
Thank you.